All right, let's go ahead and get started. So I know it was like a year, 2 years ago that we kind of did the zero turn, kind of a whole month of going through how we can grow the business. Need to make sure things are improved in certain areas to do second locations. I know you had said your goal eventually is 10 locations. So kind of bring me up to speed because I know when we last left off, you're just about to start your second location. Then your general manager left. You left stranded for a little bit in terms of having to kind of juggle the garage. Walk me through that, and then we'll get started.
Yeah, absolutely. So, phenomenal month of coaching from you that I received. Going into it, we were like, "Hey, we want to franchise our business. We want to build this big, multiple location." We were trying to kind of figure out, like, do we want to build one big behemoth, or do we want to do a franchise, which we were kind of really leaning towards. And so, after going through that whole coaching with you and everything, now we want to do really corporately owned locations. I think we'll be able to have a really big impact on people. And so when we were going through that process with you, we were just starting like our second location, and we had a general manager that we pulled up from the field, and we actually moved the business to his house. And so that was a whole thing. We moved it over to his house, and we were basically running the location at his house. And long story short, it did not work out well. And so we had to basically scramble to, number one, find a new GM for the second location, and then number two, find a location. And this all went down like in, I think, end of January. So right before the spring rush, we're trying to ramp up, get our second location going, and our general manager resigns. He leaves, and we don't have a location anymore because we at that time had 5 trucks and we were running it out of an HOA house. It was kind of crazy. And so all that said, kind of what has changed since then because of that. So we were going to start our second location about 30 minutes away, and we kind of shifted gears a little bit. We actually bought a hard location real estate property for $416,000. We put about $100,000 down on it, which literally months later, I kind of restructured that and was like, that probably wasn't the best idea. After hearing your advice of putting a whole $100,000, we could have started another location with that. But what it did is it allowed us to have basically both locations now run from that main location. It's kind of near both of them. And so we have 2 locations now that run out of them. They're different territories, but they still meet up in the same thing in the morning. I wouldn't recommend that for anybody for down the road. Definitely you can. Our mindset now is storage units all day, like cash flow over fancy shop. And so, but I think it is going to allow us to scale to have that like headquarters command center type thing, down the road. So, but we're getting squeezed with profits. The last like year and a half, dude, it's been tight.
So let's rewind a little bit. So let's go through kind of like the low of that second location. I know you're pretty amped to get the second one up and running. First general manager was kind of going good for a while there. What did you learn throughout that process? What would you do differently if you were going back and starting your first secondary location, I guess, again?
Yeah.
Besides not starting the location in the general manager's house.
Yeah. So being very selective with the general manager. The general manager that we had put in place, like it was very new. I mean, he was a great team member, and he was reliable, all that great stuff. Like he checked all those boxes. But at the end of the day, like you want somebody in charge there that the guys respect and basically look up to. And so, because they are that whole culture, and that wasn't there. And so there was a lot of diversion happening when we promoted this individual, and it just was not good for the culture at all. Like we heard a lot of stories like after he had left and whatever. So just be very selective with the GM. And you always talk about like that will make or break the location. That was our first lesson.
What were some sort of like early warning signs to you, Will, that like either this wasn't going to work out, or was it more on his end, he just needed to move on and he left? But was there warning signs that for someone that has a general manager that you were like, okay, this is starting to go off the rails a little bit?
I think it really just comes down to like being coachable and like being like having humility. I think that was the core of it. I mean, he was very reliable. He did his job. He was very good at it. In fact, he would even try to like tell other like employees like what to do and stuff like that. And we're like, oh wow, like we see leadership abilities, but are they humble enough to be coachable, to understand when maybe they are wrong, have integrity, be just all like that stuff you can't teach. And so, you can always teach somebody how to mow a lawn and do all that stuff, but just be very, very selective and just know like you're giving those reins to that individual, all of it. And so that was, I think, like the biggest thing that we noticed.
And so once he left, then did you basically consolidate back to being one location almost immediately, just like pull the stuff out of his garage back to the main shop?
Yeah. So we kind of scrambled. We actually like within 30 days we bought that property. We put a
Oh,
hundred.
really? So like right away?
Yeah.
Oh man,
We were.
I've done the same thing before to get shop space, and it always is a regret later when you're in a pinch to have to do it fast.
Yeah, and like the other thing too in our minds though, because like when we moved the location to his house, he was dude. It was so weird. Like he worked for us, so I was his boss, and then, but he was our landlord, and then we were friends outside of work. Like there was just way too many hats being worn, and it was really weird. And so at the end of the day, I mean, we moved a $600,000 business to his house, and I wouldn't want that on anybody. And so I'm sure we messed up on a lot of things about like personal boundaries, and I'm sure vice versa. It just didn't work out. And so we scrambled within 30 days, literally bought another property. And I remember in my mind, I'm like, I do not want to answer to a landlord anymore. So I want to, like, the key to building wealth is ownership. And so I'm like, I don't want somebody to tell me what to do. That's why we built a business. So that's why we bought.
So then you moved the location. You still wanted to do 2 locations from the same shop space now. Walk me through, are you having general managers of that second location, or are you just trying to like kind of ease into 2 locations by kind of keeping the book separate, et cetera, and splitting the routes?
Yeah, originally we wanted them to be completely separate. When he left and we lost like our main manager or general manager for the main location, we were kind of scrambling and a little nervous and scared of like, oh man, how are we gonna find a shop space, get another general manager trained, run our like main location, and then get the other one like rocking. Like it was just a lot. And so we were like, all right, let's purchase this location. We've got 6 trucks. We need somewhere to park it. We want to own it. And so then it kind of like eased us into it a little bit of like having both locations run out of the same location, because then we could see kind of what was going on and stuff like that. We did want it separate to learn the process of like, how do we separate the books? How do we separate payroll, to learn that? So it's like, okay, now we just copy and paste this. And so that was really the mindset of that.
Got it. And since then, have you got a general manager for the secondary location, and then you're kind of managing the main one still?
Yeah, so I am acting as a regional manager over both of those. I say that, I take a really like low salary. Larissa stepped up and is the general manager for our main location. That's going to do probably about maybe 800,000 this year. So she's running that. I'm helping her with like, upsells and stuff like that, office admin stuff. And then we do have a second general manager we hired for the second location, and he's doing all the field ops. I am supporting him in the office slightly.
Got it. And then in terms of kind of learnings from doing, buying the land, for example, obviously it's a huge cash outlay. And so most of the time I just tell people, hey, look, it's a different business you're getting into. And so walk me through kind of like that first year, because usually that's the very difficult part from a cash flow perspective. Once you put $100,000 of cash down on a piece of land, and then you got to improve it to actually get it usable, whether it be fences or gates or security, et cetera. So walk me through that, and then kind of, has that improved? Is it still a work in progress? Because I know a lot of people are wondering, like, should I buy a shop space?
Yeah, I would not recommend to buy a shop space for anybody that is like doing our model, right? Like under 800,000, you can run it out of storage units, cash flow over fancy shop all day. In fact, the next locations that we build out, the next 3 to 5, like, are definitely not going to have like purchasing that location. Tying up $100,000 on a shop space is a lot. I don't think, I mean, we kind of needed it, but like we're playing a long-term game of like, we're trying to build a similar command center on our end, on the office. That's why, like, even still to today, like, dude, we don't utilize the shop as much as we think we needed to. Like all we needed was a place to park the vehicles. And so we're learning through that. It was a complete tight crunch for cash over the last year. Very, very tight. Very, very tight. I wouldn't recommend it on anybody. We're sweating. We're back up into a corner. Which is kind of nice because the only way out is forward, right? We have to grow top line to make, sure we're paying the bills and all that stuff. But yeah, it's been very, very tight the last year.
Very cool. All right. Well, so where we're at now is essentially you now have the one shop space, two locations kind of vicariously being ran from the same area. You're trying to build the backend systems to be able to scale it up. So what can I help with to kind of go from where we're at now to the 10 location marker? Because I know that's sort of the goal.
I think really the biggest thing is going to be like structuring the businesses on the back end of it while also like figuring out how to scale the office side of things. Like that is our big, like, I mean, we know how to build like the second location is probably going to do 125,000 this year. Like we can copy and paste that, like that's very simple. So like, I think for us is like, how do we structure the office side? So the main location we have as a corporation, as a S corp, and then the second one we started is an LLC, completely separate. Like, I don't really understand right now, like between Elizabeth and I in the office, like a percentage of our time is split up like this. That's just, we just take that salary basically from each location. But like going to 3 locations, like am I supposed to like be billing our like other locations like for the time that our office is spending on it? And then like, if so, how do we do that? Like, how do we track every minute of every day? Are they really just like sitting there with a timer and like doing that? Like, how does that? I don't understand all that.
Yeah, so there's a few ways you can do it. Like, really, the only reason to do the timer is going to be most impactful for their first 5 locations, because up until your 5 locations, your first location is going to make so much of your revenue, right? So like, let's just say you had let's say you had 10 or 15 corporately owned locations. I would just divide it all by 10, divide it by 15, and those costs get split up evenly between the locations, because then you can just you can just round these numbers, and then really your GMs are incentivized to grow because like, hey, you're just getting a cut of the cost of admin, and so you should just keep growing because you're just paying a cut of it. That's the easiest way to do it. Just start dividing your admin costs amongst your locations. Alternatively, what you could do is run the books without admin on those LLCs. So for example, you have an LLC for each of the locations that would pay all operating expenses, the wages, materials, et cetera, from each of their accounts. And then that would roll up into the S Corp. And at the S Corp, you would have command center, and from there, you would pay the people in the office, the rent, et cetera. So that way, it's like, you would still mark the performance of each location based upon their operating expenses, and then it just rolls up into the admin. It's just not as accurate, because then if people are using admin more, like a specific location is using admin more, it's not going to be seen in their P&L. They're just going to look way more profitable. If you're doing that, then you just have to make different incentives other than profit for your GMs, because they're not actually getting the real cost of admin applied to their P&L. And so, at the beginning, a location that's scaling up, so like your second, third, fourth location, will chew up way more admin as a percentage of their revenue. And so it'll make the first location look bad if you just combine all of the revenues together, right? That's the simplest way though. Charging by the minute, like if you actually make everyone track, is a pain in the butt. We had to do it because we had franchise locations. We have to invoice everyone appropriately, but it will be so painful for you because the money goes the same place. Like, it doesn't really matter. It's more literally just to keep the books organized. So if I was you, I would probably do it as a function of revenue. So for example, location 2 does 200,000, for example. Location 1 does 800,000. Okay, 80% of cost of admin is going to be added as a journal entry to the first location. 20% is going to be added to the secondary location, and just do it as a function of revenue. That's what I would do.
So are you saying like So for the staff that's working in the office, are they getting two separate W-2s because they work for two companies?
No,
Or
I would do it from the S corp for those, and then I would do a journal entry from the S corp. So, for example, if you think about like we have a franchise entity, right? So like that's where Command Center sits. Think of that as your S corp. Then think of like each of your locations as different LLCs underneath the same S corp. So the employee at Command Center is going to still get a pay stub from the S corp. So is all of your employees out in the field, because the S corp is the holding company for your LLCs. So same EIN. You could do different EINs. Doesn't matter. Like you'd file one tax return, but then your books are going to be separated in terms of QuickBooks. And so the only reason you're really doing that is for the sake of incentives for your GMs. That's the only reason to split books.
gotcha. Okay.
And so I would probably just say, okay, look, all the costs we're going to keep separate for the cost of Command Center. So all the wages, all the rent, all of the utilities, all of the computers, all that stuff is just going to be put into these categories. At the end of the month, I'm going to simply take whatever percentage of revenue. This one does 80,000 a month. This one does 20,000 a month. Okay, 80% is going to be a journal entry into QuickBooks for that location. And then 20%, because based upon revenue, that's what it's doing, is going to go to the secondary location. And then as time goes on, you're probably get closer and closer to where they're all a relatively similar percentage or revenue size. And then you just start making it simpler. Like, hey, everyone gets 1/10 or 1/11 or 1/12 as you get more locations.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense.
And then that's when you get economies of scale. Like when you start hitting past like 6 or 7 locations is when Command Center like actual make economic sense. Because right now, like it costs you a lot of money to split these books and like try to have like 2 different softwares, 2 different QuickBooks accounts, different general managers. Like all of this is completely waste. It's only really useful if you're scaling past 6 or 7 locations where you actually start getting economies of scale, because now you have one shop, one piece of rent, a bunch of employees that show up to Command Center. Let's say you have 4 or 5 employees working there full time doing admin. Well, you have one rent space, you have one shop, you have one place to spend utilities, versus if you had to do 6 different ones. And so until you start getting that size, it is not worth it. Like it is a money pit to be spending on this. And like even like I'm sure you're learning like the coaching and the systems around the Command Center is not easy. And so in terms of the vision of like the actual cost though, I would probably just do journal entries based upon revenue divided amongst the locations.
Gotcha. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Absolutely. I was just nervous. I was like, man, I don't really want to build a call center company.
Dude, it's tough. Like, so, yeah. It's easier when you're corporate because you can have the same systems for every single location and you don't have any deviation. But even when you start getting general managers, they're going to have preferences. And so you got to determine like up front, how much leeway are you going to allow a general manager to have in terms of hours of operation, in terms of when they do estimates, how many estimates per week do they do? Do they do in-person estimates? Do they only do over-the-phone estimates? These are all little tiny things that start to become massive bottlenecks when you start scaling the location model and Command Center. Like, I think I've said it before, but like scaling Command Center is 10 times harder than anything I've done. It's just very difficult. Even when you do corporately owned locations, because everyone's got different schedules, different services. The larger location literally is ran like a different business than one's just at 125,000. It's like a completely different business. And so it's very tough. What are some of like the main bottlenecks you've had in terms of like operations at Command Center?
Honestly, like we try to branch out a little bit and let the second location do kind of its own thing, but I think we're going to really keep boundaries on it and be like, these are the services we offer, these are the ones we don't, so that way we can get to 10 plus locations way easier, and the office isn't like having to figure out like, you know, all those like weird things, you know, and just really just try to create a simple scalable business that we follow the same model for each one, and then we can hopefully scale that much quicker.
Yeah, like I'd recommend, because you have corporate, you have full control, like that's the advantage over franchising, is decide now whatever all those things are going to be. Like, what kind of service are you going to offer? What hours of operation? What is the estimator availability hours going to look like? When are in-person estimates allowed? And just make it standard, because that's the hardest thing to do for Command Center is the variability. And because you own it, you can just do whatever you want. And I just, from like the beginning, be like, this is the model and no one deviates from it. The challenging part for us is we have to allow flexibility. And it literally probably triples the complexity of everything. But if you can just get really narrow into like, these are the services, here's the hours we expect a general manager to be available for estimates. We know it does not change across any location. And if you can solidify those now, it'll make command center like way easier.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a question. So on the when you structure the like percentages, so like let's say that one's doing 800,000, the other one's doing 20 or 200,000. Are you just so as those separate LLCs, are they just sending the money to the S corp of 20%, or like I guess I don't understand like how the LLC is sending the money to the S corp, or like what? I know you said it was one EIN maybe at the top. Could you maybe help
Yep.
me
So
understand
you
that?
can have a lot of different profit and loss statements that go into one tax return, right? So you can have, so for example, when I had the 5 locations out in North Carolina, 2 in Washington, that all still went into one corporation at the top, but they all had different LLCs and they all had different P&Ls. So it's basically, think of your S corp as just your holding company, and then you have LLCs. They have different EIN numbers even. And from a liability perspective, you want that spread out. That's why it's good to have the different LLCs. However, in terms of moving money, the bottom line is the money from an LLC is just going to be taxed. If I take it directly out of the LLC, I'm going to get self-employment tax, so 15% off the top. I want to avoid that. So I'm just going to put that LLC underneath an S corp. So any profits from that LLC get rolled up into the S corp. I'll take one salary from the S corp.
Got
In
it.
terms of like where the profits go, they sit on the P&L as retained earnings. And then the S corp has all this cash available in different LLCs, and it can move money however it wants. At the end of the year, though, all those P&Ls are simply being combined into one tax return. So I have
Okay.
Augusta Lawn Care Corporation that basically has all my in-person actual locations that mow grass. I file one tax return for that. But there's different LLCs, different EINs, different P&Ls, all underneath that. And each individual GM feels like they're running their own business.
Got it.
But basically, you can have an LLC underneath an S corp.
Okay. That makes sense. That makes sense. Okay. Awesome. Very cool. Very cool.
And then right now, in terms of bottlenecks, is it really going to be like trying to find that next general manager? Like, what's the next step? I know you guys at 125. I know cash has been tight. Is it a matter of like, hey, let's be in profit mode for a year? What's sort of the trajectory you're going?
I think so. In the next 12 to 24 months, we should be able to start our third location. That one's going to be completely segregated, which I will like. I was very scared at first, completely doing that because it's like, oh, I'm not going to be there if he shows up late, all that stuff. But I think what I found when both GMs are running it from the same location, there's like crossing of like, hey, can you help me out with this or help me out with this? And I'm like, guys, stop. Like, you need to order, mulch or whatever. And it's just like, there's a little bit of that, but it helps really be like, hey, it helps the accountability and the ownership, like completely segregating, I think. I think the biggest other thing would be is maybe just like the performance pay for like the office staff. So I built a profit based on top line revenue right now for how much the office manager is managing. So every like 20,000, she's getting a bonus based on that, plus my time involvement. So the less I'm involved, like fall, winter time, the bigger her bonus will be. But if I'm like involved 25% of my time or 50%, then her bonus goes down a little bit. But I think as we start to scale and get like a second off, because we're gonna need it next spring for sure. Like, as we like kind of try to ramp up. But like, even if it's just part-time, like, I don't know. I mean, we were doing like $10 a lead that booked or whatever. So, they'd get like 18 an hour plus every customer that they book, they get $10. I mean, do you think like that would be probably okay for maybe somebody temporary, or do you have like maybe a different?
So the challenging part is going to be like, that will work for probably, like if you're trying to get 10 locations, it might work indefinitely. But like the challenging part is as you grow and you get past say 3 or 4 people in the office, you will have to start segregating roles and responsibilities. And so finding a metric for each of the departments is the hardest part. So for example, like when we first started up into 10 locations, everyone on the phone did everything. Like, and everyone on the phone also did QuickBooks and also ran pay for performance and software and like all like did everything, and it was a bunch of generalists. And the hardest switch was having to make specialties and like departments and then like department heads. You won't have to get at the department head part, but you will have to, if you're going to get to 10 locations and have 4, 5, 6 people in the office, you'll have to have like, hey, so-and-so is the salesperson. Like in the office, they answer the phone, they handle incoming estimates. So-and-so is the bookkeeper. Like they're doing all the invoicing, they're doing the billing, they're doing past due and receivables and collections. Okay, this other person is doing like pay for performance, dispatch. Like you're gonna have to segregate it eventually. And the reason I say that is because if you create a comp plan now that is based just upon like new leads, guess what everyone's gonna want? New leads. They're not going to wanna go do QuickBooks. They're not gonna wanna go do dispatching because there's no incentive tied to it. And so that would be the only thing I would caution against as you get like a secondary office person, et cetera. You don't want to create the perverse incentive. It's just like everyone wants sales, but then like no one wants to reconcile the books.
Got it.
And so I would just be careful with that because we started with very similar type of comp stuff is all around the lead situation. But then as admin grows and you get more locations, the challenging part is like the vast majority of their day becomes like clicking buttons and not selling. And so I want to create either so like the biggest thing with admin is retention. If you can, like someone that's in the office has been with you for a year or two is like literally 30 to 40% more effective than someone that's a month or two in. And they learn way more skills. So we've really, like, I know I'm a big P4P person. And so it's like, hey, frontline team members, they are getting paid a percentage of revenue for the office. And they, based on efficiency score, the whole 9 yards. But we track every minute. If you're not doing that, I would probably tie it just against tenor. Like if they're with you, they just start climbing a ladder because you want them to stay in their admin role. Like you've had Elizabeth for a few years, right?
Yes.
Yeah, like admin people are just as hard to keep as frontline team members. And so if you can have a really good ramp based upon tenor, I'd probably stick with that, knowing that like if they are doing a good enough job to stay with you, they're doing a decent job. Because retraining and training office people is horrible. Like we spend now it's like over $150,000 a spring just on training new team members at Command Center. And so like even at your size, if you have 2 or 3 new people you have to train every single season and then they drop out in the middle of spring rush, it can really cripple the business. And then the GMs get mad. For us, it's franchisees get mad because now there's a backlog of admin.
Got it. So when does that shift happen? Because like, you know, is that at like 2 or 3 feet or office when it starts to shift where it's like, okay, we need to set, it's like one person needs to be designated sales, maybe one person customer service. Obviously spring rush, it's, hey, all hands on deck, right? We're all catching sales calls, but like eventually, you know, maybe 8 months out of the year, we're able to kind of identify those roles. Like, I guess when does it happen? Cause like right now I'd say like 50% of my time is just helping in admin, right? Yep. Is it like maybe at like, or is there like a certain percentage of revenue that we're managing or maybe locations?
Yeah, like I would probably say it's when in terms of when you start delegating like roles, it's probably when you hit your fourth person. Because your second person is like help. Third person, backup. Fourth person, if everyone shows up to work, we don't know what to do. And so, you know, if it's great when you have 2 people because if one person doesn't show up, things still move along. It doesn't fall on you. Third person, really nice because now it's like, okay, if someone's gone, we still have like full steam forward ahead. When there's 4 people, it basically becomes if everyone shows up to work, we no longer have enough for everyone just to twiddle their thumbs and wait for the phone to ring. We need to know like what are my daily tasks and then what are my like what are the things that must get done in the day, like checklist items, and then what are the things that I must react to, i.e. the phone, right? Or emails or customer service stuff. And so having that list for each person is important. And so what I would do is say like, look, reactive, until you have 10 people in the office, which you might not even want to get there, but let's say up until that point, you can make sure that reactive is like the same stuff for everyone. Answer the phone. If it rings twice, everyone needs to be on deck. You can do call rules to move it from different people. So if you did have 2 or 3 people at the top of the org in terms of the office, they could just have their phone group ring last, for example. But like, it's like phone must be answered. That is the bottom line. That's a reactive task. But then break down the non-reactive tasks. So instead of right now you having 30 things that someone does in the office, start just chunking it down. So the person that like responsible for QuickBooks does that twice a week. That's part of their like to-do list, right? So at Command Center, we just use software. Basically, every single day they are sent a checklist of like the non-reactive tasks that need to get done. And then as we've grown, there are people that never have reactive tasks. They just do the one thing. But I don't think you'll ever probably get to that size. Because you'll probably, I would imagine even with 10 locations, you get away with like 5, 6 people in the office. But even at that stage, you're gonna want like one person that just is an absolute crush at like the dispatch board and scheduling, right? You're gonna want one person like that just absolutely crushes at collections, invoicing, and billing. You're gonna want another person that is like the bomb on sales over the phone estimates. So like their phone probably rings first, and then if they're on the phone, then it gets branched. So you're gonna start wanting to think like that. I think at your current size, like at $1 million, it's all about just like you got to be efficient in the office. Because like right now, the cash crunch caused by the real estate thing, like we cannot afford to have a third person. Like we've got to be really, really scrappy because we can't be sending more than 15% of revenue on the office. Well, 15% of $1 million, like we're hitting that already close because of the mortgage, the utilities, the office rent, and then 1 or 2 people in the office. We're already above that. And so be very careful of that would be my recommendation. And that percentage will come down as you add more locations because you have the fixed expense of the shop. And like you bought the real estate once. I think in 5 or 10 years, you'll look back like, that was a great purchase, but it's gonna be painful for the next 12 to 24 months because you have no cash.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we are experiencing that full hand. Like, the cash crunch, dude. It's tight, but we just did 90,000 at the main location. Actually, last month was the most revenue we've done. We did just shy of 105,000 for the month.
Let's go. Good for you,
So,
man.
no, we really appreciate all your help and all your coaching, dude. It's phenomenal, and yeah, really looking forward to the book and everything as well. So.
Okay, well, is there anything else? Any other questions I can help you with before we hop off?
I think that's it. I love the Copilot, the office hours on Saturdays. I'm always jumping in there, so
Okay.
I really appreciate you answering all those questions. But yeah, no, I think that's you answered a lot of it. It was really just like the office side of things of how to really like pay the employees W-2. But like you said, put an S corp at the top, LLCs underneath it, and then you could flow money back and forth, and that makes sense. So.
Yeah, and that way, like the people in the office, those get one W-2 from the S corp, but then you will want to reconcile it between each location, so that way they have an accurate P&L, right? Because if you don't, they'll all run like 35%, 40% profit margin at the location size because they're not paying for rent, utilities, etc. So if you wanted to get lazy and not do journal entries, you could also just be like, hey guys, every single month, a percentage of your revenue is being whacked for admin. And then you get profit sharing. You could do that too, but if you want to be more precise with it, you'd take the actual cost of your admin. But like, I'd be careful too because you're spending so much time in admin right now, which I'm not a huge fan of. But like, that's going to reduce the cost tremendously, and so you're going to artificially inflate your profit numbers for your locations because you aren't taking a big salary. And if you were to replace yourself, you'd probably be spending 22, 23% of revenue on admin by the time you include mortgage, actually paying yourself what you're worth, etc. So I would be like, if I was you, I'd be trying to get rid of admin off your plate as soon as possible. You got to go into sales. You're good at sales. Admin's not going to be your strength. Like, create the systems. Are you in sales at all, or are you like mostly admin?
Honestly, I mean, somewhat admin, but literally, like, the reason we did 105,000 last month is because I literally did upsells every week, and I was like managing when we blast out those texts, dude. There's like I'm scheduling 200 estimates for Larissa to go out. Like, she's busy all day pumping out 20 estimates a day, and I'm constantly like just managing like the texts and the emails that come in of like upselling customers. And we just kind of rotate, based on leads, because we have like 3,000 or 4,000 people in the database. So when we blast out stuff, it's like lately or before we would send one text or email out, but it was so overwhelming because we would get like hundreds and hundreds. We have to break it up now where it's like, hey, we're going to do this section of the territory and then this section and kind of like manage it that way. But that's really kind of what I'm focusing on now. I was doing a lot of like admin stuff. So two things that I like foolproofed our hiring process where I don't have to do phone interviews anymore. That was a really big bottleneck, and I was spending hours a day in the springtime. Now we just literally send them a text of a form to fill out, And as they answer the questions, it will unlock the next one. And if it doesn't, if they don't answer it right, like, are you 21 years of age? They say no, or like driver's license, and they put no, it'll just submit it, and then we won't even get notified or anything. So it's really nice. Like I cut it down, like our hiring process down to like 20% of my time, what I used to spend on. And then we also set up kind of like a easier like AI answering machine that answers like a bunch of basic questions. But like if they ever mention anything about like what is the price, like can I get a quote, it just sends them a link to our website that says like, here, get a quote, fill out the form. And then on the back end we have it where it like actually inputs their information on whatever location CRM. And so that's helped a ton, like free up my time, what I was working on for a while. But now that that's all done, I'm like, man, what do I do? So like, I'm just like, all right, upsells,
Yeah.
is what I've
Yeah,
been
like
focused.
like I don't know if you watched the video I made last Tuesday, but like I actually had you and a few other people in mind because you're kind of crossing the $1 million marker in terms of like what to do next. Because like you're gonna be in that weird spot. Like if you start getting general managers, you're as a regional manager, if that's really gonna be your title, your full-time job is supporting GMs. And so you basically become a trainer of general managers now instead of trainers of guys out in the field. And so if that's really going to be the role, and I think it's going to be your role more around the $1.5 million marker. So as you grow the second location, actually it's making money. The third one's starting. Like as soon as you get 3 locations, your job will be managing the managers. And so I'd be doing everything possible at this stage to like systematize your admin and get someone else in there. Like I'd definitely be getting a second person in addition to Elizabeth, because if she's gone right now, it all falls on you. And like that is a recipe for then that same week a general manager goes down and all of a sudden you are like literally dead in the water. And so you're going to be in this weird spot when you have multiple locations, but yet you're still trying to run the office. And so I would be really pushing you like systematize the admin and then get out of it as quickly as possible, because it's like doing admin is not $100 an hour task. And you're, as a CEO, once you pass 7 figures, like you got to start thinking about like what is actually the highest value use of your time. And it's just not admin.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's really good advice. Really good advice. So, and then you're like, the admin is obviously doing the upsells, not because up until 800,000, it's a working GM model, right? So like, they're out in the field most of the time. They're not the ones sending the upsells. It should be the admin side, right? As supportive.
Yeah, they can send them. Yep. And then it's just a matter of like, well, if it's over the phone estimate, admin can still handle it. If it's a drive-by or an in-person estimate, then the general manager is responsible to do those. But yeah, like in general, any upsell task, if it's like sending the text or sending the email, that should be admin. Anything to do with communication is admin. But then if they have to meet the customer, then it'd fall on the salesperson, or in this case, the working GM. But have you heard like tracking your GMs into like 30 budget hours a week and like subtracting off of that and stuff like that?
I have heard of that, and I have heard like that to like track them 30 budget hours, and then based on like how many estimates they're doing can kind of come down. But yeah, absolutely.
It's a good way to track them. Like I'm sure right now they're mostly just like your one general manager is basically in the field at 125. But as they scale up, it's a good way to benchmark them. And so like each week we have meetings with our general managers and they have a scorecard. And one of like the big things is like obviously labor efficiency of their crew. But if you only have 1 or 2 employees, like that becomes less important than like, is the general manager being effective? And like the 30 budget hours is like the number one thing on their scorecard when they're smaller. And that is like, how much of their time is actually being spent producing revenue? And then we have an actual way to calculate whether or not they should or should not be in the field. Like if they have tons of estimates on their schedule that are in person, well, that's fine. But if you're not growing at that rapid rate, you better be out in the field. And so I really recommend, like, as you move in the regional manager position, like, create systems for admin, then create systems for your general managers, like scorecards for them. Like, obviously, P4P is good for the field labor, but it doesn't do a whole lot for the general manager. Because at a general manager, like, if you're paying them, say, 50, 60 grand a year on $125,000, $150,000 annual revenue business, they will make or break whether or not you're profitable. Whether or not they're efficient out in the field makes or break it. Because they're literally making up 30% of the cost structure of the business. And so, you'll move into that role. I'm sure you'll figure it out. It's just you'll have to get used to that constant change. And because now you're in the cash position where you're at now, it's just going to be really tough to pull yourself away from admin, because that's a defensive measure. Like, admin is a defensive measure. And when you don't have a lot of cash, you're always feeling like you should be in that place. But at the same token, like if you're going to have multiple locations, if you're going to get general managers to actually run these locations themselves, you being an admin is just like a horrible use of your time. As,
Yeah.
as bad as that sounds.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, last question that just came to my mind.
Yeah.
So, would you recommend if we had $100,000 cash in our position right now? Would you recommend pouring that fuel on the second location and just trying to ramp that thing up to like 500,000, 600,000 in the next like 12 months, or would you recommend starting a third location 30 minutes away? And then,
I definitely would not start the third location.
okay,
I would take I know you're disappointed. I know it stinks to have not to do the third. The third is always a good one. It's a milestone. But I would get the 125 one to 400,000 and then raise prices. And so the reason I say 400,000 is because if you get 400,000 and let's say you're charging $70 an hour, if you just start charging 85 or 90 and do a price increase, you're immediately above 500,000. And I know above 500,000, I can make a working GM model very profitable. Under that is just really, really tough. And it's very susceptible to that GM leaving. And so what happened when you had your last gym, if that happens for a location that is doing 125, 150, 200, you are going to be stepping back into that role. And so I really like the idea of getting to at least 400 and then cranking it to 500 simply by raising prices and immediately putting $100,000 a year in your pocket. If you do that, you'll go into the third location with a much better cash position. I don't want you starting a third location when the first location is not pumping out profit, or like that second location is not pumping out profit.
okay, that makes sense.
Because
That
like
makes
your
sense.
command center is gonna eat you for lunch. It's so expensive. Like you're kind of finding it now, but when you get that second person, you're gonna double your overhead expense. Like it's gonna like I would imagine if I looked at your P&L across the board, you're probably paying about 20% to admin right now.
Oh yeah,
And so
yeah.
like at least, and if you paid yourself more, and that'll kill you. And so I really want that. I would recommend take a year, put that second location like fuel on that fire, get that to 400. Then you can next spring rush just crank the prices on it, so it's immediately profitable. You know you have the cash flow to do it, and you'll go way stronger in the third location because you'd have those things in place. And when you're in profit mode, the GM is super incentivized. Like currently they're not making enough to like they could walk away and they don't really care because they're going to go to their job. If they're pumping out $120,000 a year in profit because you just cranked it into profit mode, all of a sudden like they don't want to leave, and the likelihood of them leaving is far lower, and you don't want them leaving when you start a third location.
Right. Yeah. No, dude, that's gold. That is gold.
I know it stinks. The third location is a cool one. I remember mine is very cool. But I would recommend at least getting it to 400,000. I think you could do it honestly if you dumped fuel on it, and scaled it up and put your time and attention on it, and then got a great GM. Like I think this time next year, that location's doing 45, 50,000 a month. And then I'd be giving you the green light to do the third one. And it's okay if even if that's like July or August next year that you're starting the third location, it's cheap because you're doing storage units. You could literally just start marketing that area and then get clients and do the drive. It's only 30 minutes. Get a route started though. I'd do this. I would do this. I wouldn't do the storage unit. I wouldn't split out, but I would start marketing in that area a little bit and then just create a route so that this time next year, even if it's midway through the year, just have a benchmark. Hey, when the second location hits above 40,000 a month in revenue, green light, we're raising prices, and I'm going to start the third location.
Yeah.
Right? And so immediately you'd have the cash flow, the second location would be profitable, and then you already have like, say, 40, 50 lawns in that area. You could create a route immediately and make it where at least the GM has 30 budget hours a week of mowing.
So you're saying on that third location, once we hit the 40K at the second location, we start the third one. You're saying to basically we could start that, run it from the main location that we're running for at least maybe a few months if it's towards the end before getting the storage unit for the next spring, or you're saying get the storage unit.
What I'm saying is even over the next 12 months, even when you are focused on the second location, get lawns inside of where the third location is going to be.
Got it.
So that way, when you split it off, it already has 20, 30, 40 clients, and you can put a GM, and from day one, it's going to break even.
Okay. That's brilliant. That's brilliant. And have location 2, so build that.
Exactly.
I got it. Okay.
And then what
Dude,
you
that's
do,
brilliant.
you say, hey, GM, I'm going to be taking off some of your revenue, but we're going to raise prices. So basically, you're still going to be at 40, 45,000 a month in revenue. You're going to be profitable on it, though. I'm taking away the clients that are the furthest away and breaking it off.
Got it. Got it. That makes sense. That makes sense. Dude, that's gold. That's gold. I like that a lot.
Like this is what we recommend even for our franchisees now that are starting all these secondary, third, and they're like, going on now their locations is like the only reason to do it for us is like if they're worried their territory is gonna get purchased out from underneath them and they're willing to do a chain. But like if you don't have that pressure, it's like just market inside that area. Know you're not gonna make good money because you're driving so much towards them, and then get a good enough a route where you can put a general manager in place, and from day one they have a full schedule, which means if they start selling any jobs, they need an employee, and that location will basically break even.
Yeah.
And so it's a much more steady way of growth instead of you dumping 40 to $50,000. If I said like, yeah, go for the third location, you spend 40 or 50 grand on that location, you bring your cash reserves way down, and your second location would not be profitable.
Right, right. Absolutely. And to take that step further too, for the second location, he's incentivized on top line growth. So why would he not want to expand his territory and get more revenue? Because he's not really thinking about profit. He's thinking about just getting more jobs and getting more revenue. And so that would obviously help him too. I think he'd be on board for that. Absolutely.
Let's go, dude. Well, good luck, man. I know you'll crush it. Tell Larissa I said hi, and I appreciate you for everything you do for the community too.
Absolutely, brother.
Okay, take care. Have a great weekend.
You too. We'll see ya.
Yep, bye.